Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. It's just gone from the 18th to the 19th of February 2015. We are on the break, the cusp, the dawn of a new moon, which happened only a few minutes ago, literally. And tonight we hope to be a special show and a special night. This is the Velocity of Now, and if you want to visit my website, it's www.thomassheridanarts.com. There's also uploads from my YouTube channel, which is Thomas Sheridan Arts on YouTube, to the media site for this program and other specials I produce at newsymbolsmedia.tv. If you want to help me out, you can go to my website, Thomas Sheridan Arts, click on the book shop link at the top, and purchase one of the books there. You're getting knowledge, and you're helping me out too, and you're helping spread the message. If you can't afford a book, share the sites and spread the word. And you have been spreading the word, and I want to thank you for this. The numbers have been phenomenal for downloads and listens. I've been late getting the YouTube versions up, which happens. It's not my fault. It's not anyone's fault. The producers of the show are in the middle of a horrific house move at the moment, and they can't help it. So as soon as they're settled in, and we're all settled in, that'll be a lot quicker. But right now, bear with us because real life stuff comes into it. So I want to thank Paula and Neil for that. I also want to thank Carrie Lee and Kira Young over at the Moon Lodge on peoplesinternetradio.com, who will have a special tonight because they always have a program on the new moon. And it's going to feature Mater X. So that's on after this show. So you have a choice of either hanging on for this show to listen to George and Dee, or you can switch over to People's Internet Radio and listen to Kira Young and Carrie Lee, who've been very gracious in moving their show back 2 hours so we can capture as many people as possible on this beautiful celebration. Now, things are strange at the moment, and tonight's show, I want to basically talk about, well, lots of things, but it'll be in the context to begin with of the so-called satanic paedophile abuse ring in Hampstead in London. Now, this story has absolutely exploded within the alternative media, and it's exposed basically everything that's wrong with the so-called truth movement, the conspiracy movement, the alternative movement, whatever you want to call it. Everything that's wrong with this scene has been exposed with this disaster. The background on the story, I'll give it to you if you're not aware of it. In the UK, in Hampstead, which is in, I think, North London, 2 children were put on a video, which you can see on the internet, which I would discourage people from sharing because those kids' identities are not being protected, claiming that a massive satanic paedophile ring operating in Hampstead, and they're in the centre of it, and they're raped, and there's child murders, all the usual kind of, and I don't mean this in a twisted way. I mean it in capital letters, in a sexy way, in the way that politicians and intelligence services sex up dossiers in order to justify wars and other intelligence operations. This has been likewise sexed up using all the trigger words such as pedophilia and Satanism to fire up as many, shall we say, unstable and hysterical elements within this movement. And let's be honest, that is a vast amount. It's also firing up the Google AdSense hunter jockeys who want to put this stuff all over everywhere so they can rack up their Google points, build their audience, and get their donations button flying. And I don't play that game. I'm not here to do truth consensus. I'm not part of the team. And I don't care if I'm left with one person listening to me. I don't care. I didn't do this. I don't do this to be Mr. Popular. I come from the mindset of an old-fashioned investigative journalist. I look into things, I see what the story is, and then I relate it back to past events to try and see if there are emerging patterns. And what floats my boat more than anything else is when a story enters this movement or this scene and it spreads like absolute wildfire. This is a huge red flag for me, and this is a huge prompt, shall we say, for me to jump in there and start looking at it. Now, I want to begin tonight by reading out to you an article, and I'll comment over the article, a blog post that I've written today on my blog, which you get to from thomassheridanarts.com. You'll see a button at the top saying official blog, and this is the story, and let's bring it to this story. And I'll also put this in the link section of newsymbolsmedia.tv. MI5 back in the engineered hysteria game again. One of the reasons I believe that the Holly Greig story, that was a story in Scotland from about, 7 or 8 years ago, it's been running now, of an alleged satanic paedophile ring again, and involving a Down syndrome lady. One of the reasons I believe the Holly Greig story is a hoax, apart from the fact there's zero evidence based almost entirely on an unsworn statement, is because it happened at a time when people in the alternative media were looking into the Dunblane genuine horror and asking questions the mainstream media were not asking. Now, what Dunblane was a horrific school massacre that happened in Scotland. And a person called Thomas Hamilton, who shows all the behaviour and traits and of a mind control slave, basically. He shot 16 children, young school children, and a teacher dead. And it was used, basically it was immediately be used to justify gun control laws in the UK. At the time, Tony Blair was I think Tony Blair was the Prime Minister. It was going well until the British gun lobby contacted a journalist called Sandra Utley, I think her name was, and she wrote a book called Dunblane Unburied, and she asked some pertinent questions about Hamilton, his connections, and other individuals through basically an interesting connection of well-connected individuals going back to Hamilton and right to the Prime Minister's office. Tony Blair sealed the files for the usual 50 years or whatever it is, and the alternative media at the time was really getting results on this. They were really, really jumping in on this story, and it was getting into the mainstream. And then suddenly this thing called Holly Greig shows up out of the blue and spreads with the same psychotic wildfire that this current Hampstead abuse story is taking on. I'll continue in the article. I think, this is me quoting myself, I think the Hampstead story is being used to distract from something else which we were getting close to, and MI5 had to create some new bright lights of satanic sparklers and paedophile sprinkles in order to move highly excitable and hysterical types' attention away from something very real and dangerous to the establishment. Now, what makes me have this suspicion? More or less the same characters are involved in both these cases. A kind of network of interesting individuals, shall we say, who were behind the hyping up and the, shall we say, truther legitimization of the Holly Greig case are also heavily involved in this case. We also have the same wild hysteria and same reactions from the alternative media. They're going crazy, falling over themselves because they're hearing those trigger words, those magical, scintillating trigger words. Pedophiles, rings, and satanic. Again, we have a mother with questionable behaviour being held up as some kind of sainted martyr. Now, this woman, at the very least, should not have put her children visible on this video and put it out there, because they're on the world, they're being shared all over the place now in this kind of psychotic frenzy, and those kids will have to live with the horrific repercussions for them later on in terms of school bullying and so forth. And there's also another angle to this as well. If these kids were, let's say these kids were abused, well, the case has been destroyed. It's been completely destroyed, the case. It's been destroyed because they've named people who were involved, and I'll get to this later, that are allegedly involved, and the whole case has been trolled. There'll never be a prosecution here, just like there'll never be a prosecution in the Holly Greig case. It's a massive distraction to throw people off away from the scent of something else, and I'll explain to you what that is in it later on and why it is. Now, most depressing of all are the people who have been found guilty of no crimes or having their lives ruined after being outed as satanic pedophiles. And this is the most disgusting part and shows the, shall we say, the inherent psychotic depravity of so many people in the so-called truth movement, that they do not even have the decency to apply any kind of morality breaks. While calling themselves spiritual and empaths, they throw the names of people who've been convicted of nothing, arrested for nothing, all over the internet. Now, do you remember the evidence claiming that Holly Gregg was telling the truth, that people with Down syndrome do not lie? That's absolute rubbish. I've actually worked with people with Down syndrome, and they lie all the time. In fact, they make up constant stories. I was doing an art class in a place, it was kind of like a day centre for people with Down syndrome, and they used to come in and tell you the most ridiculous stories, and it's just the way they are. They'd say that they had a boyfriend and they were on the moon and all this kind of thing. What they're using as evidence in the Hampstead case, kids do not make up stories about sex abuse. Yes, they do. Anyone who thinks that kids are completely innocent don't remember their own childhood. As Bruno Bettelheim, in the book The Uses of Enchantment, he demonstrated that childhood is filled with all kinds of darkness, all kinds of negative traits and negative behaviours. And more importantly, if these kids were abused, you see, when you always get down, I'm not going to implicate anybody here in this because I don't know anything more than any of the rest of you, but usually in these cases, it's a partner or someone involved in the immediate circle who, if the kids have been abused, and remember, abuse isn't always sexual. It could be something like neglect, and it could be something like hitting them, striking the kids when they're bad, unnecessarily, and then to trump those, or should we say sex those stories up, it suddenly becomes sex abuse. And kids will also say anything for a reward if they're told to say. Now, let's get to the beef in all this. Now, I'm going to be spending some time explaining how intelligence services work. Now, let me explain to you how I feel about this case. A, all the evidence points that the mother is probably the most, shall we say, the most pathological element within all this. She exposed her two children to the frenzy of alternative media. It should have never been done. Secondly, if the kids were abused, and I'm not saying they are, and I was looking at the kids again video, they do look somehow kind of neglected. They do have that lack of, they almost look like they were raised in a Romanian orphanage. But no prosecution will ever be available to help these kids because the case has been completely destroyed by the hysteria around the satanic sex abuse, and particularly that word satanic. Thirdly, I do believe that there are satanic rings. I'm talking about dark black satanic rings, but I also, just like there are many cults, and the black satanic cults function and operate, you'd be surprised, mainly in affluent neighbourhoods and affluent places such as Hampstead. It comes basically out of the swingers scene. Rich or an upper middle class families into swinging scenes get into kind of a black satanic aspect of that. It's all to do with further thrills. Now, as we know, it's cult orientated. Rich people are just as stupid when it comes to joining cults as anyone else. Cults are heavily involved and extremely useful to the intelligence services because they allow the intelligence services to leak and manipulate through the cult. So I'm basically agreeing that maybe the kids are possibly abused. There is a satanic aspect to it, but it's not what you guys out there think it is, because you don't know. You're completely ignorant of what Satanism is. There's a huge whiff of the intelligence services in this, and I'll explain to you why. And the mother, as it stands, similar to the Holly Greig case, is a serious questionable judgment and, shall we say, behaviour. If I was to, I'm going to go back to reading to the article again, quoting myself again. If I was to make a guess as to why the intelligence services created this latest satanic abuse false flag, it would be to distract from the list of MPs and the sex parties which came to light in late 2004. And this is what's happening, okay? The story went mainstream and the establishment were clearly very, very worried. It meant major newspapers carried it. I saw it on mainstream message boards. The stories of an MP in Westminster who murdered a young boy during a sex party. The New Scotland Yard are investigating it. The story was major, it was breaking, and it was one that started in the alternative media. Just like Dunblane back in the day, we were getting results. We were actually starting to look like a competent group of people. And then suddenly what happens? They throw in another hysteria-infused distraction. So suddenly the alternative media has forgotten all about the case involving the MP sex parties, which are very, very real, and the possible murder of a young boy by an MP. And this appears to be a real scandal because the mainstream media is covering it. And they are now looking, this is the Truth Movement, wildly for non-existent satanic pedo rings in Hampstead. There's the same round of nasty infighting going on in the alternative movement, with the true believers calling anyone who doubts the Hampstead case as being pedos themselves. The same sickness and division like last time. The establishment got caught with the proverbial knickers down during the Profumo affair. That's when they found out that basically the same kind of sex parties and swinging scenes that's probably behind the satanic element in Hampstead were basically being trapped by the KGB. Since then, MI5 has been active in creating distractions so this never happens again. We had the satanic panic in Rochdale in the 1980s, and that was to deflect from Cyril Smith and possibly Jimmy Savile and their other boy-raping friends. In 2015, they have done it again with the Hampstead case. Mission accomplished. Now, I want to present evidence as to why I feel this way about this. I'm not just throwing this out there. I've basically always been interested in how the intelligence services work. Now, there is a term within the intelligence services for when they create one of these events, these distractions. They call them a spectacular. They're spectacular in that the people find them scintillating, and scintillating comes from the Latin term scintillacum, or scintillacus, which means lights and sparkles in the mind. So when they wanted to create a spectacular with Dunblane, they create the Holly Greig hoax. When they want to create a spectacular to divert from the MP almost certainly involved in a sex scandal which involved the murder of a young boy, which went mainstream, they created this spectacular. And these people, you see, the thing is with the Truth Movement is that the people in the Truth Movement seem to have this idea that if they figure out all this stuff about, the occult and all this stuff about the intelligence services, that they have this bizarre notion that the intelligence services themselves have not figured this out. It's almost like, we're the truthers, we've got this sussed out, and they have it in their minds that the actual people who invented this stuff have somehow not sussed this out. I've been saying this from day one. The biggest psyop in the Truth Movement is the Truth Movement itself. And yes, there are occult aspects to this. But a lot of you don't know what the occult is. And we'll talk about this tonight. And you don't know what magic is. And you don't know what Satanism is. You just hear these words. Now, if you want to listen to my show, so you expect me to be like just about everybody else in this movement, who basically rehashes David Icke's books from 20 years ago over and over again. You're listening to the wrong guy, okay? As I said, I couldn't give a toss if 99% of you ran away after hearing the show tonight, it means nothing to me. I don't want to be popular. I just want to find the truth. That's all I'm interested in. If you want popularity, go support a football team. Don't be following me. If you can't handle this information, I don't want you in my life. Even if you disagree with me, I'm perfectly fine with that. Even if you think I'm talking a load of bollocks, I'm perfectly fine with that. But if you can't handle it, you're probably never going to be able to handle any kind of mature discussion or discourse in your life. You're not going to be psychologically and cognitively able to do that. Now, let's talk about how the intelligence services function, okay? And you'll find this very, very interesting, because if you look at how the Cold War, spying and such functioned, it's really interesting. When the intelligence services discovered they had a mole or a spy, let's say we're in, say, Berlin or Lebanon or something like that, and the KGB want to know what's going on in, say, the British Embassy in Berlin, okay? They would find a contact. Now, often it would be somebody who would work in the British Embassy, a cleaner, someone who cooks the food in the canteen, a chauffeur, anyone, even a person who does deliveries, picks out the laundry. That's who they seek out, right? The KGB will approach these people and say, we'll give you money if you tell us anything you see going on inside the British Embassy. And they would have drops, and they're usually done in hotels. The drops. The Hilton Hotel, particularly in places like the Brussels Hilton, there's a whole sort of esoteric thing around hotels. I keep meaning to talk about this, but I'll get to it at some point, but it's never fully discussed. So they find, say, a guy who's a cleaner in the British Embassy. The KGB approach him and says, we'll give you $1,000 a month and prostitutes if you tell us anything you see what's going on in the British Embassy when you're in there. At some point, the British Secret Service will discover that this guy is a mole. He's a contact, and he's spying on them. They'll find it out somehow. They'll follow his money somehow. They'll find the fingerprints on the cash they gave them. It'll be found out somehow. Okay? Now, it would be no use to them firing this guy or killing him, because that would show two things. One, they have lost the contact back to the KGB. So they can't kill him, and they're not going to come up and they're not going to go up to him and frighten him away. So if they suddenly frighten him, he'll say, I'm not doing this anymore, and you'll stop going on. They need him. The British Secret Service, MI6 in Berlin, need this contact, this mole, as much as the KGB need this mole. So what they do then is, see, you have to stop, you truthers have to stop reading books about UFOs and ancient aliens and Anunnaki and Nibiru, and you have to start doing real research, okay? Read books about the Cold War and espionage. What happens then is, MI6, knowing that this guy was a spook feeding stuff back and forth, what they do then is they create a spectacular. The spectacular is used to throw the KGB's intelligence data gathering operations inside the British Embassy off on a wild tangent. So what they do is, as this guy is visiting, they will start setting up something like a really flashy looking, but almost like deliberately flashy looking computer espionage listening system. A big parabolic dish will be installed on the back, a big aerial on the top. New fellas will be in there, will be on computers with now this is back in the Cold War days now, not today. you remember that scene in the Monty Python film, the machine that goes bing? It's just like that. The machine was impressive because it went bing. So this guy sees all this stuff being put in there, okay? All this stuff, right? He then goes back to the KGB and says, they're putting some kind of strange listening device. You want to see this thing? It's got like a big listening dish out the back of the embassy, a big antenna on the roof, and there's all these fellas with headphones on their heads beside computers reading stuff. Now, that's all fake. That's all been done, so he'll send that back to the KGB. The KGB then think that this guy has given them some real information. And then the KGB think they have a super listening station inside the British Embassy. All they have is the machine that goes bing. That's all they have, okay? That's the spectacular, okay? So what's basically happened here is that through this spectacular, the MI6 agents inside the British Embassy have gaslighted the KGB by gaslighting the contact. By changing his sense of reality, they've changed the sense of reality of what's inside the British Embassy. In time, eventually, the KGB will realize that that's what this guy saw, a spectacular, pointless information, a pointless piece of theatre, and they were duped by the MI6 guys in the British Embassy. Then they'll drop the cleaner as a contractor, and then the police will jump on the cleaner and charge him with being a double agent. And that's how it works. So when they have somebody, when they want to create a distraction from, say, real espionage processes they were involved in, they create a spectacular, and then the KGB are gaslighted by the spectacular, and they stop looking at the real stuff they're really doing. A distraction, a psyop distraction. And these things, like the Holly Greig cake and the Hampstead case, both scream of that, because they're verifiable mainstream sources that we can point to the distraction from. What happened in Dunblane and what happened in the sex parties at Westminster. And the spectaculars are Holly Greig hoax and the satanic paedophile. And that's what the spectacular is. And we're going to go to the first song, and then we'll talk about more about this. And if you think I've blown your mind now, wait for the next hour and a half. See you on the other side of the song. And that was Cow by Gene Loves Jezebel from their first album. They were a really brilliant band when they first started out. And then Hollywood got their hands on them and turned them into a bad lipstick metal band. But that I always loved the guitar riff in that song, and I loved the style of vocals that they had. Cow by Gene Loves Jezebel. Now, in the first section, we spoke about what's the intelligence aspect of the Hampstead satanic child abuse hoax. Remember, I'm saying satanic child abuse hoax, not the child abuse part. That could be true. It's the satanic part, the spectacular, that's been created by the intelligence service to distract from a real issue. Now, let's talk about the satanic part, okay? Now, yes, let's talk about. You need that. You see, you so badly need an educational truth movement. You start going on about. You watch sites about, and they show like the all-seeing eye, and they go, "Oh, it's Satan, the devil," and I saw, and you don't even know what you're on about half the time, and everything is satanic. It's all satanic. Why? Because someone said Satanism, and Satanism sounds spooky. Ooh, Satan, ooh, like a movie. Ooh, it's a trigger word. It's a trigger. It's charmed. When you see the word like that, what happens is you're subject to fascination. What fascination is a form of ritual magic. It comes from ritual magic. And what the fascination does is when you see the word or the charged sigil, say the swastika, okay, and you have a certain emotional reaction to it, the blood cells in your eye are the closest things, the closest blood cells to the surface of your body. There's blood vessels in your eye, and you can see the red in them when you have bloodshot eyes. So the fascination goes is, in ritual magic, that when the sigil, the word, or the hypnotist hits that blood recirculates back into the heart, and causes a emotional reaction which triggers hormones in the brain. Fascination. So when people see satanic paedophile rings, the blood vessels in their eyes are fascinated. It goes to their hearts, it fires off hormones in their brain, and they're enchanted. They're enchanted. Same when some people see a swastika or a hammer and sickle, and a McDonald's logo or a Pizza Express logo. Okay. Firstly, I will indulge. Let's pretend I believe there is a satanic paedophile ring inside Hampstead, right? And I'm Mr. Truther. You know, I'm 47 years old. I don't have a wife or a kid. I live with my parents still because my wife left me after I'd spent the weekend watching YouTube videos and told her that the world was run by shape-shifting aliens, lizards, and she left me. And so I smoke like 20 spliffs a day and this kind of thing. And I watch YouTube videos all day. And that's I'm researching, okay? And I have all the answers. And so, you know, I know what all these symbols mean because, well, I watched YouTube videos of someone else repeating something that someone else repeated, going back to nothing, okay? So I get my map of Hampstead out, right? I get my map of Hampstead out, right? And I look around and I go, ooh, why Hampstead? Is Hampstead satanic? And then I look at where the Pizza Express is. And the Pizza Express is in a neighborhood, a part of the town that's called Horse and Groom. Groom. They're grooming the children. And it's on a place called Heath Street. Ted Heath. Oh, Ted Heath, the notorious satanic pedophile, was outed many years ago as a child killer and abuser. Oh, folks, we're through the matrix here. Let me get vigilant citizen up and go with giving it the five knuckle shuffle, getting all excited up for truth. I'm having a fucking truth wank here. Okay, that's going on, right? That's me. That's another two FCC warnings for me, right? So then I look around further. Oh, across the away, there's something called the Holly Mount Steps. Right across from the Pizza Express. The Holly Mount Steps. And if you walk up the Holly Mount Steps, you come to the Holy Hill. It's all Satanism. And then you can avoid the Holy Hill by going through the Golden Yard. It's a shortcut to the Holy. That's pure Masonic, satanic code. They're sending messages to each other. And then if I look down further, I see there's a place called Roslyn Chapel Hill. I've uncovered the satanic link. Worship me. Hit my website. Watch my YouTube video on the Reptilian Resistance 2012 channel, where I'll have music that goes dun 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 dun. I'll have like really bad or the theme song from Requiem for a Dream, din 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 din, and I'll have like a grey lizard's eyes, and that'll all come up, and it's a satanic Hampstead, and then a map will appear showing all these places. Oh, I'm the new Rick Clay. Oh, wow! And never for a moment do you stop and pause and think that just maybe the intelligence services picked Hampstead so you would find those locations and get yourself a truth boner. Not once would you think that. No, you're smarter than MI5 and MI6. You're really smart because you've outsmarted them. And I can tell you one thing, if Rick Clay was murdered over what he uncovered on the 2012 site, it was because he was starting to figure out that the whole thing was deliberately done for that reason to charge the sigil of the London, the Zion 2012 logo, and if the poor guy was killed, which I don't think he was, or committed suicide, is because he got to the real truth. The real truth was it wasn't a big satanic edifice. The real truth was that it was a big, huge mind game, gaslighting thing to get people concentrating on the Olympics for that purpose. That's it. No disrespect to the man and his family, but if that's how it happened, I reckon he got... You see, there's Truth 1.0 where you find all the satanic stuff and all these symbols, and then there's Truth 2.0, where you realise that that's a load of bollocks to cover and hide something else. It's the spectacular, okay? So they picked Hampstead that has all these satanic places, Horse and Groom, Ted Heath Street, Hollymount Steps, Holy Hill, the shortcut to the Golden Yard, and the Roslyn Chapel Hill not far away. Dun, dun, dun. And the MI5 agents are pissing themselves, laughing as you make your videos on the Reptilian Resistance 2012 channel, and you think you're like a hero of truth. And they're love, you know, and you think you're so clever. Donate. And then this is when the Witchfinder generals come in. Now, let's talk about the Witchfinder generals of the past. In the 15th century, there was a book produced called the Malus Maleficarum, which is known as the Hammer of the Witches. And the book was used in order to identify witches, okay? So they did this, said this, acted a certain way. They were witches. This is why you should hate them, because they kissed the devil's bum under the full moon and all this stuff. And we all know that the real Satan. See, let me explain something to you. The real black magic is not what the people who've been accused of, but the ones who are the accusers. So you had the Witchfinder generals accusing innocent people of witchcraft. Catholics, Protestants, Jews, right? But what those people didn't do was the satanic part. The satanic part was what the Witchfinder general and the priest and the local governors did afterwards. You understand? That was the real Satanism. The real Satanism was the real Satanists, the black Satanists. Now, I'm not talking about. You have to remember now, Satanism falls into two categories, just like religion or anything. Most of them are good Satanists, a nature-based religion that believes that in the purity of ideals and the purity of expression. That's one side. And then there's like an all occult and all religious. There's the black Satanism, and the black Satanists know, like all black magic, it is the one that gets the results the most, and it appeals to psychopaths and crazies. And in this case, it's been very, very useful to the intelligence services, okay? So everyone's going mad. You see, I've discovered I'm the greatest truther in the world because of all these satanic places in Hampstead. So it's a centre of a satanic circle, okay? Hampstead was picked for that reason. Now, the kids mentioned two places. They mentioned the Pizza Express, and they mentioned McDonald's. Now, the Pizza Express is on, as I said, it's on Heath Road, and they were probably coached to say that in order so people could look that it was on Heath Road and find all these places around. The McDonald's that's in Hampstead has been closed since 2013. It was an interesting one. There was an 11-year battle by McDonald's to try and get planning permission to open a McDonald's in Hampstead, because it's a bit of a snooty, hoity-toity area, and they finally got a planning permission. Apparently business was good, and it closed down for no reason. So the building is still there. So these satanic paedophile events that are going on in the back of McDonald's, the restaurant isn't even there anymore. Did you even check? Now the pizza, see, now let's talk about why they mentioned those places. That's because, you see, the truthers are already fired. I'm fired up. I'm a truther. I'm hunting Satanists. I'm standing up for children because I'm a hero like Robert Greene. I'm a hero, right? So anytime they know that anytime these types see a Pizza Express logo, they remember the satanic abuse. Anytime they see a McDonald's logo, they remember the satanic abuse story in Hampstead. Because what happens was, you don't need to create a sigil from scratch in order to create a sigil. You can take a previously known design and charge it emotionally. The National Socialists did this with the swastika. If you look at from day one, when Adolf Hitler went out there and made his impassioned, fiery speeches appealing to all the problems and the suffering and the neuroses and the frustrations of the German people, behind him was the swastika, a previously existing symbol. And those emotions went past Adolf Hitler and into the swastika. So every time you saw that swastika from that point on, you remembered why you supported National Socialism, because that was a charged symbol. The same thing with the Pizza Express logo, which even looks like a sigil. It's charged now. So anytime they think of Pizza Express, they will think of satanic pedophiles at Hampstead. Anytime they see a McDonald's logo, the same thing. It's part of the spectacular aspects of it. The stories that the kids have posted about these things are absolutely ridiculous. They absolutely could not be true. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen like that. There are paedophile rings, but they don't function. They don't eat babies and wear skulls. That's in the movies. That's to appeal to the Renfields in the truth movement. And let me tell you, the truth movement is filled with Renfields. You remember Renfield? Renfield was the guy in the asylum whom Dracula targeted in order to do his work. Why? Because a person who's not psychically strong, which is if people enter the truth movement psychically strong, all they have to do is spend enough time reading these kinds of stories, looking at this kind of nonsense on Vigilant Citizen, and in no time their psychic defense will be destroyed or damaged, and they will be turned into what I would call a Renfield, a truth Renfield, okay? So they know that these people have been damaged, or they're damaged people before they even got into this stuff. And these are the ones who will share this video of the two kids and all the other nonsense about this being a satanic ring and all the other ridiculous stories around it. Because they're Renfields, because they're psychically damaged, their firewall is down. That's the main reason I got involved in this alternative scene, was to help people rebuild their psychic firewall. Because I could see how it was damaging people. From the very first event I ever spoke at, I could see how decent people were being damaged by this incredibly dark and negative information that was given them. I would be amazed if hundreds of truthers have not committed suicide because they just couldn't handle it anymore. The only reason I got involved in this whole stuff was to help people build the psychic firewall and to understand when they're being gaslighted by the psychopaths running the show. That's it, okay? That's it. Now, get that into your head, right? You're no more smarter than the intelligence services. Do not be deluding yourself into thinking that you're smarter than them. You've figured everything out. They have set the traps for you to walk into. You are a mouse, and the satanic thing is a paedophile ring in Hampstead, just like the Holly Gregg thing is a piece of cheese, and you've just got that big metal bar back down on your neck, and it snapped your neck to stop you sniffing out the real stuff at Dunblane and the real stuff of the Westminster paedophile murder of a boy during a sex party. You see how it works? Now, as I said, the Hammer of Wishes, the Malus Maleficarum, we have our Witchfinder generals in this movement. The guy who shakes the bones at the Occupy movement, he's a Witchfinder general. He knows these are the bones of dead native children. Hula, 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 hula. Ooh, spooky. And then you can actually see in that video where he waves and he shakes the bones of the dead child at the people at Occupy. You can see the people at Occupy are visibly disturbed and shocked. This black magic spell is working. There are other Witchfinder generals who have an element of hysteria as big as their donate button, where there are satanic pedophiles here everywhere. There are secret symbols, there are hidden messages. And we're going to hunt them down. And what is done to the people who get named on these lists, just like the ones in Scotland with the Holly Gregg thing in Inverness here, just like the innocent people in Hampstead, we'll assume they're innocent, the ones in Scotland, where they are exactly in the modern age treated the same way the witches the so-called witches, innocent people in the past who were accused of witchcraft, were treated. In many ways, the truth movement could be actually called the hammer of the witches in the digital age. To fire up the psychologically unstable, the psychically unprotected, in order to hunt down the new witches, people who are accused of being in satanic paedophile rings in Scotland and London, in order to destroy. And the intelligence services don't care. And you ever notice no one ever gets sued in any of these things, and no one goes to jail. Robert Greene only went to jail because he did something truly despicable. But he broke the law, and that's why he went. Okay? But otherwise, the main players, and there's particularly this interesting circle of, shall we say, witch-finder generals, who come along with their own malus maleficarum in the truth movement, and suddenly they're there just at the right time. Oh, how interesting. They vanish, and then when a real story like that breaks, suddenly they're back again with a new satanic abuse story. And you all fall for it. You all fall for it, okay? Loads fall for it. And they get all whipped up in it. Just like the old days. There's no difference in the 21st century by innocent people having their names put on a list as being part of a satanic cannibalism ring than there was in the 15th century when the witchfinder generals went around with the malus maleficarum and said, these people are witches, I named them as witches. The same thing. The world does not change as much as we would like to think it does. Human beings are not that different than we were from our ancestors. We may have more stuff, but ignorance is the eternal disease that rots at the core of the human condition. Now, there may very well be absolute real Satanists involved in this, but they're more likely to be the ones in the video prompting the kids to say these things, because it's releasing enormous amounts of psychic and emotional energy. I believe in magic because I've studied magic. Magic is real, but magic is not a supernatural or paranormal thing. It's merely the working and manipulating of human consciousness in the same way an orchestra conductor with his baton and sheet music manipulates and orchestrates the various instruments within the orchestra in order to attain a certain sound, frequency, and energy. That's what it is. It's not supernatural. It's the changing of someone else's consciousness to create change in conformity with the will of the magician. You always know when these things are in process, because there is something called, that I have named, the psychotic barometer. The psychotic barometer is when you see the Renfields in the movement going bat bleep crazy. The more crazy they are, the more hysterical they are, the more the spell has been cast. The more the sigils have been charged. Because the energies, the psychic energies, are in a turbulent burning wildfire, and the hysterical and the mentally unbalanced are the ones who are the most psychotic. They're the ones calling anyone who doubts the story a paedophile. They're the ones who are typing in all caps one post after the next on social media. They're the ones who are in a state of absolute wildfire convulsions. And the last time that happened in this movement was the Holly Grieg case. And it's happening again in the Hamster case. This is a very good indicator of a disturbance within the psychic state. And there's only one thing that does that, and that's black magic. So yes, black magic Satanists who've taken the short path to power are involved and have probably been recruited, just like the intelligence services recruit cults. They've probably recruited these people who maybe actually even be in Hampstead. We don't know. We don't know the identities of the people interviewing these kids. They could very well be practicing Satanists who wrote the script out for a maximum energy harvesting. So it serves two purposes. I'm absolutely convinced that some of the main players in this scene, in this modern hammer of the witches, are Satanists. I can tell you for a fact, I can't name the person because obviously there's legal repercussions. But I know for a fact one hardcore black Satanist who I had personal contact with and immediately recognized him for what he was, or she was. It could be a man, could be a woman. I'm not going to say what they were. And this individual was in the High Court in London behind Holly Greig and her mother with a big, big smile on the face, sucking up the energy. This is why these types don't seem to get sued. When it was anybody else, they'd be sued and destroyed or in prison because they're helping the spectacular take place. It's a double deal. You guys get your satanic energy harvesting. We get our spectacular to distract the truthers. All good. The intelligence services, you find cults very, very useful. Now maybe not everyone in the cult knows they're directly working for the intelligence services, but one or two of them at the top always do. Always do. And they're also, shall we say, gaslighting the members below them, even though they're justifying by saying, well, we're getting what we want from this. We're getting energy and we're getting money. Remember the story of the KGB and the contact I just told you earlier on between the British embassy and the KGB in Berlin? Same idea. So who are the contacts in this case? Well, the contacts in this case are the truthers who are losing their minds and sharing the videos. Oldest game in town. All you truthers, you think you're so clever. You think you have it sussed. And you have been played into one trap after the other because the enemy of ignorance has been cultivated in your brain and it grows like an untamed forest inside your psyche. And the only thing you have to protect you, your psychic firewall, has been overgrown and riddled with weeds. Your land is barren, overgrown with scrub and forest, and you do not have an integrated psyche that's feeding your consciousness rather than tearing your consciousness to pieces in order to lead you into traps. There are psyops everywhere. The truth movement's biggest psyop is the truth movement. Study. Learn about the occult and magic, and not from the Reptilian Resistance 2012 channel or some other truth guru who mentions terms, magical terms. Ooh, archons. Ooh, Saturn. Ooh, satanic. That's not an education. That's like going to McDonald's and claiming that you went to culinary college. That's what that is. Because you know what's inside a Big Mac. There's generally, if you read my book, The Animal of the Psyche, there's generally 5 stages of ritual magic. Now, these stages of ritual magic are used in not just the occult, but they're used in stage magic. They're used in hypnotism, stage hypnotist shows. They're used in marketing. That's what I learned from them first. They're used in communications. They're used in PR. They're used in the intelligence services, and they're even used in the military. There's 5 stages. You can read how they're described in Amble of the Psyche, but I'll talk about them here for those of you that don't like to read. They are 1, motivation, 2, ritual, 3, invocation, 4, medium or mediumship, and 5, ensul of outcome. That's ENSUL. The purpose of the ritual, and remember, it's not a supernatural ritual, it is a process that's very much grounded and concreted into the reality of the world you live in, is to create change in the material world from an idea that was fostered in the mind. So what was the idea fostered in the mind? The idea fostered in the mind was to create a diversion from the Westminster sex party where a young boy died. And what was the change to get the diversion to happen? So that was to create change, to bring that into fruition, to conform will with that of the magician. The first part, the first stage of the ritual is motivation. The motivation was to make people in the alternative movement who were getting real results again to forget about the Westminster scandal involving the possible murder of a teenage boy by an MP. Then they devised the ritual. The ritual was the Hampstead satanic paedophile ring. To create the video in collaboration, quite possibly with real Satanists, at least a cult, to deliberately place it in a part of London where you could find the Holy Hill and the Golden Yard and the Roslin Chapel and all this stuff. That was the ritual. And the ritual, the Mass, or the High Mass, was the releasing of that video into the alternative movement, the truth movement, the conspiracy scene, whatever you want to call it, which was wildly and psychotically shared and exploded all over the place in no time. The indicator of a psyop, I might add. You have the usual interesting accounts on Facebook, names like Avalon Moonshadow, Star Chaser Matrix, Wiccan Tree Goddess, and all these New Age buffoonery names. You can't find anyone behind that account. It's usually a picture of a galaxy, a unicorn, a rainbow, or a piece of sacred geometry, and these are always the ones who seem to push these pedomania stories the most, because they're agents, a lot of them. They're spook accounts creating the spectacular. And they're part of the ritual. The third part of the ritual, of the 5 stages of ritual magic, is the invocation. This is when you call upon a higher power. In the transubstantiation of the Catholic Mass, when the priest holds the Holy Host and the communion and the wine up towards the crucifix and calls upon the Eucharist, he's calling upon Jesus Christ, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, to be infused into the wine and the Holy Host. That is the invocation, the calling of a higher power. And what was the calling of the higher magical power in this story? Mass hysteria. That's what it was. Mass hysteria. Something that is outside normal human behavior and cognitive processing. A state of psychic imbalance. A highly contagious psychically form of black negative energy, which does not exist within this reality. It's purely something that's an imbalance in consciousness, in energy, and that was the invocation. So we have at first the plot to distract, the motivation. Then you have the ritual, the video, and the placing of it in Hampstead, probably in collaboration with a genuine satanic cult. Now remember, the cult are the people in the video coaching the kids, not the people they're claiming that are in the cult. Just like in the Maleficarum, the real Satanists were the witch-finder generals who wanted to burn women so they could get their burn Catholics and Protestants so they get their jollies. And the same thing, they were the real Satanists, not the ones who were in the fire. Things haven't changed, folks. Then we have the invocation, the calling of the higher power. The higher power or the unseen force of mass hysteria. Then you have the mediumship. The medium or the mediumship was the internet, the Facebook, the YouTube, all these truther sites, all that kind of thing. That's the medium to spread the hysteria, okay? And then finally the ensual or the outcome to create change. And they've created the change. The change is that a so-called satanic plot that has been cultivated in the minds of the intelligence services to distract from the real case of the Westminster murder of a young boy at a sex party has been now successfully diverted away. Look over here, children. Look over here, hysterical children. I have new sparklers for you. You remember the witch, the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Children! And he has a cage full of sweets. I have sweet study mixtures, lollipops. Oh, the colours of the rainbow. And then the kids walk into a trap. The sweets from your stranger is the hype and the hysteria and the sex words, the fascination. And that's the process that's worked. It works in everything. The 5 stages of ritual magic are screaming out of this story. We're going to go to the next song. I'm not sure what it is. I'll announce it when it comes back. I need to get a drink of coffee. I hope you're enjoying this, and we'll come back for the second hour of the Velocity of Now. We'll talk a little bit more about this and a few other things. And please stay tuned for the second hour after this song. Thank you, Paula. And welcome back to the second hour of the Velocity of Now. Me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. I've just been told that we're breaking the listenership records tonight. The place is hopping, and thank you very much again for staying involved and being part of this discourse, because it means a lot to me, because I actually say I'm very much enjoying doing this show. I like that the fact that I have built up an audience of people who are true real thinkers, and even if they don't agree with me, at least they're willing and mature and adult enough to stay along without calling me a Satanist or a witch or anything, any other horrible name, because they don't have to face the reality of their own stupidity. Now, during the break there, someone asked me, why is there 5 stages of ritual magic? Well, it was in Crowley's theses on magic. Well, see, Crowley was good in the sense that he was very... what he did was he got a lot of magical text from going back centuries, basically in the Hermetic text, and he basically said there are 5 stages of ritual magic. And this is what they are. And he basically showed the different canons and the different schools about the occult that they came from. And it's pretty common. In the European, well, it's not European, it's actually, again, Middle Eastern. But in the Necronomicon, there's a part of in the Necronomicon, the redrafted version by... what's his name? Oh yeah, Eliphas Levi Zahed, and also John Dee, where they pointed out in the history of magic, which is that there's the A.E. Waite version, which is from 1963, that there's 5 they're called of the verse signs, and the purpose of these signs is to protect the magician. Now, the first sign is the sign of Bjor, which is the one that the heavy metals. That's when you see you're so ignorant out there. Sorry, you just are. And you have a picture of George Bush and all these celebrities doing that one where they have what they call a throwing up a Baphomet, where the 2 middle fingers are down and the thumb is not grabbing the 2 middle fingers. It's slightly, the thumb is pressing on the second finger slightly under the index finger, and that's called the sign of Bjor. And the purpose of that is when you enter in the magical circle, you must put that sign up there. It's almost like a tribute to the demon world. Now, people are saying, what's he on about? No such thing as demons and all this kind of stuff. He says there's demons, and he says there's jinn, and there's the evil, and he says all this stuff, and but he don't believe in satanic pedophiles. You know. No, listen to me. Just listen to me, okay? I don't know why I do the Russell Brand voice when I'm invoking a moron, but it just seems right. When I said earlier on that magic is not supernatural in that sense, you see, what the purpose of the magic ritual, whether it has candles, bells, invocations, standing in the circle, robes, darkened lights, jumping around the fire, shaking the bones, what the magician is doing is creating a pure stream of psychic energy that's focused. That's what that is. And so the ritual helps them do that and helps them feel comfortable. The magic circle is just a drawing on the ground. It's not a force field against demons. Now, demons are, I don't know what demons are. They could be an aspect of human consciousness, a broken aspect, and to protect yourself. And when they say, I'm protecting myself from demons when I enter into the magic circle, what they're doing is you're protecting yourself from madness, from fear. And so you throw up the sign of war. What do you think is a satanic symbol that you see them all? And that's to protect you as you enter the magic circle. I'm going to quote here directly from the Necronomicon. Ooh, Sheridan's a Satanist. Praise Jesus. Holy Jesus Christ. He's going to read from the Necronomicon. Oh, my Jesus. Lord Jesus. Hey, Lurleen, can you get me another 64-ounce iced tea with 35 sugars? Oh, Jesus Christ. Get my guns and ammo. Okay, I'm going to read from the Necronomicon, right? Of the fair signs. The most potent signs shall be formed with thy left hand when they implieth them in rites. Ye first sign is that of Vor. It is the nature in it be the true symbol of ye old ones. Make ye thus whenever you would supplicate those that wait beyond ye threshold. That means that out the calling of higher powers. Ye second sign is Kish, as it breaketh down the barriers and opponent ye portals of the ultimate planes. In ye third sign goeth, ye great sign of Noth, which sealeth ye gates and guardeth ye pathways. Ye fourth sign is that of ye elder gods. It protected those who would evoke ye powers by night, and it banished ye forces of menace and antagonism. Note, ye elder sign hath yet another form when it is inscribed upon ye grey stone of Nyar. It serveth to hold back ye power of the great old ones of all time. So basically, when you enter in the magic circle, you sign of Vor, you sign of Kist, you sign of Noth, and ye elder sign, done with the 5 fingers. And that's probably the origin of the 5 stages of ritual magic. So basically what I've just done then, in the second hour of this show, I've entered into a magic circle, and I've given a kind of a salutation to the old ones, the demon world, not to attack me. So I'm giving you guys an education. You see, that's why I'm telling you to read my books. Read The Anvil of the Psyche and Walpurgis Night. I explain the whole magical process there through the history of National Socialism and even marketing and public relations and movies. Get yourself a real education, okay? I don't make this stuff. I don't pull it out of my backside. The source material is decades and hundreds of books of my library, going back studying years. Sheridan, he quotes from some book of Necronomicon. He's a Satan man. He's a devil man. He's a devil man. I'm going to make me a video of the devil man. You know yourself. Anyway, that's that. Now, that's all I'm going to talk about the Hampsteads thing for tonight. And the rest of the show, we'll go back to our normal broadcasting. But that's just to show you that you've been played into a trap. Don't get played into a trap ever again. And you're no smarter than the intelligence services. And watching all the videos on the Reptilian Channel 2012 doesn't make you any smarter. Sharing articles, destroying a child's life, 2 children's life by sharing their videos. In closing, A, I believe that this has been created as a distraction from the Westminster sex party where a teenage boy was murdered. B, yes, I do believe there's a satanic element of it, and they're not the people who are being implicated and being called Satanists by the children or by the adults. They're the adults in the video. C, the mother is an absolute disgrace for allowing her children to be shared all over the world like that. That the repercussions for those children will have for the rest of their lives will be appalling. She comes across as an absolute piece of work. Fourthly, this is, I think, yeah. We have the mass hysteria is part of that to create that generation, that whole thing. And I do think the children, there might be something to the abuse thing, but it might not necessarily be sexual. I was looking at those kids. They're not lying. They're trying to please the adults who've given them a script to read before the camera was rolling, and they probably got reward for saying it. And they may well have been neglected or abused, not necessarily sexually, but it certainly wasn't in a mass satanic paedophile ring. And finally, stop being duped. Get yourself a real education and stop being hysterical, and stop feeding the Renfields and the Witchfinder generals in the truth movement. Stop feeding them, because nobody wins in a state of hysteria except the black magicians. And isn't that the irony? Isn't that an irony at the end of the day? Those of you who think you're fighting Satanism and fighting the Satans, you're actually one of the Satans. The bad Satans. Now, I got tremendous numbers listening to the show last week, downloads. I mean, I uploaded the first hour. I had trouble. I think tonight I'm going to get much quicker. We're getting better settled down. And within 2 or 3 days, I'm getting nearly 3,000 listeners, or something, between 2,000 and 3,000 listeners on the YouTube versions, which is amazing considering it's already been out there and there are thousands as a podcast. So again, I'm delighted and I thank you for all that. And so, last week, people said the second hour last week was the best hour of the show they've ever heard, and I spoke about my experiments with, well, basically electronic voice, phenomena, whatever you want to call it. And yes, I recorded these strange sounds in a jar. What they are, I don't know. Somebody said, "Are you really saying you caught a genie in a bottle?" No. I was saying under fairly strict controlled states, I have recorded interesting sounds according to prompts and questions I have asked. I'm not ready to release it yet because I want to cover my ass so I don't look like a fool. I'm very, me, I'm a Fortean. I'm very interested in the mysterious. I'm very interested in the occult, but I don't run in as a crazy Christian in a state of absolute terror. I walk in there and I look objectively, and sometimes the magic is in the actual investigation. I think all the years of studying the psychopaths and reading books on serial killers and criminologies, I'm probably like a detective at this point. I think that's why I'm able to look at things like the Amityville, the original killings by Ronald, allegedly attributed to Ronald DeFeo. And I gave you that report a few weeks ago where I do the backstory stuff. I played the sounds of what a Marlin 333 rifle sounds like in order to prove that the neighbors were lying, that kind of thing. I go back and I look again. And that's what I did with the Jimmy Savile thing. The Jimmy Savile thing is very interesting. The Operation U-Tree thing was designed to distract from the fact that I believe he's a serial killer. And to get you all, when you really think about it, all this focus on Rolf Harris and the rest of them, and they pick on funny men and all this kind of entertainers. It really made people forget about how dark Savile was, because it's just pedophiles. You never think serial killer in the Savile case. Now, so the electronic voice phenomena thing is something that's interested me all the time. And there was someone sent me an article today from the BBC magazine, and it said that, this is from last year, the people who think they tune into dead voices, and by someone called Joylyn Jenkins, and it said advocates of electronic voice projection, EVP, claim that they use radio equipment to communicate with the dead. But are they just hearing what they want to hear? In 1969, a mysterious middle-aged Latvian doctor turned up in Gerrards Cross with a large collection of tape recordings. He had, he said, been conducting experiments in communication with the dead and established contact with Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and many other deceased 20th century statesmen. The recordings, 72,000 of them, contained their voices. His name was Konstantin Raduyev, and he called his technique electronic voice projection, or EVP. It wasn't real-time interactive communication. You asked your question and then left the tape running, remaining silent. But listening back through the mush and static, you could hear something just about make out as people speaking. Gerrard's Cross was the home of the publisher Colin Smythe, whom Raduyev hoped would publish a book on his findings. Smythe was keen, but he needed to persuade the chairman of the publishing company, Sir Robert Meyer, that this wasn't all a hoax. So Raduyev laid on a series of electronic seances in Gerrard's Cross, one of which Sir Robert attended. As luck would have it, the late pianist Arthur Scheibel was online and spoke, at least to the satisfaction of Lady Mayer, who was also present and had known Schnabel. The book called Breakdown went ahead and EVP was on the scene. More technologically up-to-date than spirit slate writing and less messy than electroplasm, it dragged the world of spiritualism into the late 20th century. Nowadays, electronic voice projection is the standard tool of ghost hunters worldwide. There are hundreds of internet EVP forums and many serious and well-educated people who see it as proof positive that the dead are trying to talk to us. For example, Anabel Cardoso, a former Portuguese career diplomat who lives in Spain and publishes the Instrumental Transcommunication Journal. She has a well-equipped recording studio and claims to have replicated the Gerrard's Cross findings. "My voices are not little voices," she said. "They are loud and clear and totally understandable." And then she offered me the CD. Smythe, meanwhile, is still in Gerrard's Cross. Raduyev had wanted us to believe that Hitler spoke to him in Latvian, not a language he ever mastered while alive. He said things like "kindle" willingly, and "you are girl there, or else you are thrown out." I put it to Smythe that these were surely not the kinds of ostracisms we associate with the Führer, but he points out it could be identity theft. This is very interesting stuff here. A communicator is not necessarily going to be truthful. They could be using the names of famous people in the hope that they will be taken notice of. Our old friend Pazuzu. Just like the Ouija board. These voices on the other side will tell you anything you want to hear, and they will be anyone you want them to be. So Raduyev was a clever man. This is probably why he was so successful, than that he wasn't assuming it was Hitler. It was identity theft. Something else, maybe even himself or other people in the room projecting their psychic thoughts. We're doing that. This is why if you're involved in any group or any individual that's getting messages from a Ouija board or is channeling, get the hell away from them. These people are incredibly dangerous. They're lying or they're psychotic, and they will lead you to the gates of hell. And you can always tell that they're liars in that they build a smear campaign and cult of wild psychotic enablers around them, and instead of actually holding their stuff up to test, what they do is they attack non-believers. You can always tell a liar, a spiritual liar, by how they attack non-believers. So what has happened to the Raduyev tapes? In a storeroom in Smythe's house, almost impossible to get to for boxes, we finally found 7 1/4-inch reel-to-reel tapes, probably unplayed for 4 decades. And on one was Raduyev summoning up the dead. According to a book published at the time by Smythe's partner, a Russian voice on the session said, "Stefan is here, but you are Stefan. You do not believe me? It's not very difficult. We teach Petrus, but on the tape there is nothing, just a hiss." Well, you see, the reason why the sound could not be on the tape is because we know that audio tape, it deteriorates and loses its magnetic flux over the years. the tape is it's coated with ferrous oxide, which is basically iron filings reduced down to a microscopic level. And the recording is made by either magnetizing them north south and moving the magnetic particles according to the frequency of the music or the speech. Now what happens is, if you have tapes from the 80s and old cassettes, or even good quality old master tapes from your old recordings years ago, it's the worst way to store them. But what happens is that those magnetic particles, especially if they've been not stored in a good environment, and it sounds like these radio dives were not stored in a good environment, the magnetic particles, they just basically they dissipate and they lose their magnetism. So just to say they only hear hiss doesn't mean that those hiss only heard in the original tapes. There very well may have been a voice at a very low level, but because of the dissipation of the magnetic charge of the tape, that has been lost. Back to the article. On another occasion, the broadcaster Giles Brandreth was present when Radio Dive produced the voice of the late Winston Churchill, speaking what everyone present agreed were the words of land and hope of glory. It was credibly Winston Churchill, Brandreth remembers. But when we listened to the recordings of the tape, he had to agree that it sounded nothing like Churchill. It was far lighter than the familiar, gravelly voice. Maybe it's a young Winston Churchill, Brandreth suggested, or a Churchill impersonator. But who impersonates the young Churchill? We couldn't think of anyone. When Cardoso's CDs arrived, I was disappointed in that the voices in Spanish and Portuguese were not really very clear. According to her translations, they said things like, that there is a rabbit on your head, but Cardoso was, like other EVP investigators, definitely recording voices. So what's going on? The simplest explanation is that the electronic voice projection voices are just stray radio transmissions. Usually they are faint and masked by static interference, that it's hard to make out what they are saying, and EVP investigators has to interpret them for you. This is not a bad theory. Remember, we live in a world of electronics now, and for a long time now, even before Wi-Fi, there was, electromagnetic frequency, and sound waves can travel tremendous distances, especially if there's a lack of solar energy or solar projections from the sun. I can remember when I was about 11 years old, I used to have a very good but powerful, I think it was whatever the German, I can't remember the name, this very good German make of radios, and East German radios, and I had a very powerful one. And I used to be able to pick up medium wave stations from all up and down the UK. I lived in Dublin at the time, late at night, and sometimes I'd hear from Paris, I'd hear over into Germany, and then one night for about 15-20 seconds, I picked up a station in Rhode Island in the United States. It came in, it gave the call sign, the DJ's American voice, and the song was played, and it was the beginning of Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder, of all songs, and then it vanished. Now that shows you how far a radio wave can travel. If the conditions are right, if the transmitter and the electronics disturbance in the atmosphere is so, it's less than normal, a radio wave parts of it can project, so that can project very far distances. So that's not an unfeasible thing, but people are recording these sounds now on digital recorders, so that now rules out the electromagnetic frequency, because they would not record the voices like that. Banks has also ongoing project called the Rorschach audio. He suggests that the voices are the oral equivalent of inkblot tests devised by the Swiss psychologist Hermann Rorschach. He argues that while, when they put the paint on the thing, it falls in half, and he says, what do you see in this shape, that kind of thing. He argues that while EVP experiments think they are doing parapsychology, they are actually unwittingly carrying out psychological experiments. You see, this is why I study the Fortean and the paranormal, because when you discover it's like an academic said to me, today. He was interviewing me for his a thesis he's doing on people who are in the alternative media. And he asked me, he says, Thomas, what's in it for you? What draws you to it? And I said, I see myself as an explorer in uncharted territory. And that's what all of us are, not just me, but you, the listeners, as well. And we're going into this uncharted territory without a map. Some of us are following rivers of ideas and information. Some of us are wandering into the wilderness. Some of us are settling down and creating prosperity and ideas and creativity in this uncharted territory. And I said, that's what I'm doing, and that's what draws me into it. I want to be an explorer. I couldn't, in this day and age, it's impossible for people to become, shall we say, Lewis and Clark's or Stanley and Livingston, and or Edmondson and Scott of the Antarctic and the Arctic. Those days are over. The new landscape of uncharted territory is the psyche, and the truth movement. I explained in the first hour of the show what the truth movement is at its absolute worst. Well, at its absolute best is what I'm describing now. Is that it's a voyage of discovery in order to locate the El Dorado which lies inside every one of us. And so this story I'm reading here is a classic example of it. I didn't go into it wanting to be validated that EVP voices were necessarily true, or they could be. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying I didn't go in. But what is interesting for me is that we're now understanding, and that it's really telling us not about the voices on the tapes, but it's telling us about the voices inside our consciousness. It's really a psychological experiment. So we've gone into the uncharted territory and we found something in there we can now begin to draw a landmark map to. And that's what makes me being involved in this scene so much fun. I love the uncharted territory and I love going in with the clean slate. For example, if you take recorded speech and place every sixth of a second with white noise, the speech is still comprehensible. But if instead of white noise you use silence, it's much harder to understand. We are naturally well adapted by evolution to imaginatively reconstruct speech against a noisy background. Imagine trying to whisper in a windy forest to your hunting companions. EVP enthusiast Banks thinks aren't idiots, they're just being fooled by audio illusions that take us all in. But once you start experimenting with EVP, it's hard to stop. After Breakthrough was published in the radiodyed progress from voice captured on tape to voices coming from animals, in particular a budgerigar, or that's called parakeets in America, called Pitsu, interesting name, who spoke at the voice of a dead 14-year-old girl. Similar work is being done today by EVP researcher Brian Jones in Seattle. He records the noises made by seagulls, dogs, cats, and even squeaky doors and crunching pebbles. They all contain voices. One dog says, "Where's Sheila?" referring to its owner. Another complains of its owners. They always sail away. Jones thinks he can capture thoughts that somehow are in the air. I have documented a lot of things that are pretty stunning, he says. He would like to use his technique to help solve crime or pick the thoughts of stroke victims who have lost the power of speech. So far he's been shunned by private detectives and doctors. That's probably because he's onto something good here. But the EVP community really want to believe they are onto something, and many of us find the idea of communicating with the dead so tantalizing, so appealing, and yet so elusive that it's easy to see how normal psychological mechanisms can be co-opted into making us believe in the unbelievable. We're always told that it's this and then we enter it, or it's that and then we enter it, with that assumption. So when people heard voices, and say in the spiritualist movement, you had Harry Houdini. Now Harry Houdini is often misquoted. They said that Harry Houdini, the great escapologist, spent his life exposing fraudulent mediums. He did, but Harry Houdini was not was not anti-medium. He actually believed that there were people who could actually get messages from the other side. Houdini was just, shall we say, filtering out the bullshitters, up under FCC warning, filtering out the charlatans, because he believed that there was something to this. And Houdini was not closed-minded. Now, Houdini arranged that before he would die, that he would leave a message, and he would try and contact his wife from the other side on particular dates every year, and he never did. And it's quite a moving tape to listen to his wife saying "Good night, Harry," when after he doesn't show up. But the thing is that when we depart this mortal plane, there is an assumption that on the other side we're still human beings. You don't have vocal cords on the other side. You don't have anything like that. So that was what made the medium part more believable, because the medium, if you were a sort of a disembodied spirit on the other side, you could enter into the body of the medium and use their vocal cords or their hand to write out things. But you can't project a voice onto a tape recorder if you don't have vocal cords. It's simple as that. But I do believe there's something to it. I think there is. We're in the psychology thing, but you see, when these things are approached by people who are materialists, and they only believe in the mechanistic function of the universe and the scientism type approach, that science as a control mechanism can only explain everything, and the non-material simply doesn't exist. Of course, the non-material exists. I tend to believe. See, this is why I'm taking time getting my own experiment out there. Because I want to make sure that that's not my mind projecting into that microphone inside the jar with the sigil inside it, which I put inside Lisheen House, a place notoriously for its haunted. And whatever haunt it is, I've been in this place, and it would make the hair stand on the back of your head. Bricks were flying off the building at me. And it is also a magnet for occultists, and rituals go on in there. And it's an interesting place. And that's where I left the jar overnight with the sigil that's supposed to capture a demon. And I sealed the jar with wax and oak, brought it home, and the microphone is screwed through is running through the lid and directly into the jar, and it's not swinging, it's held in there, and then that's then sealed up with cement, fire cement. So it's a completely sealed environment. The microphone is only hearing what's in there, or possibly sound waves that might impact on the glass jar's surface that actually acts as a kind of an amplifier. And that's why I've been doing things like wrapping it up in loads of duvets and blankets and putting it in a box. I want to make sure, as best as I can do it. So, or is it me projecting? I don't know, but I'm interested. Do I believe there are other forms of... See, this is what people have asked me. Thomas, do you believe there's other forms of life form? Yeah, I do, absolutely. I believe there's other forms of consciousness. Our ancestors were right about the fairies. They're not lying. They were telling the truth. It's just been trivialized. If you look, you see, people, they could call them the fairies in this part of the world, and they lived in fear of them. Our ideas of fairies is basically Victorian or Walt Disney, that they're all Tinkerbells. It's not like that at all. Our ancestors lived in terror of fairies, in the same way people in the Muslim world went to extreme levels to avoid the jinn or the div in the pre-Islamic world, or whatever they are in all the different cultures, because psychic infection was a danger. To go away with the fairies say someone was away with the fairies meant that they were psychically infected by these other forms of consciousness. I don't know what they are. I'm not one of these people who says I know everything. I don't. I'm interested. I believe they exist, but I'm not sure what they are. But there is other forms of consciousness. I don't buy into the archons thing, because there's nothing to really back that up. The archons was just a term that the Gnostics used to describe people in charge of power structures. And then someone says to me, "Okay, Thomas, you believe in the jinn, and you believe in the possibility of demons and fairies, but you don't believe in the reptilians." And I say, why? Well, simply because the ones that I mentioned don't have a form. You see, They don't have a form. And then they'll say, well, what about all these reptilian hybrid symbols all through history? And my answer to that is, what about the fish people? What about the bird people? What about the minotaurs? There's no end of zoomorphics all through and anamorphics all through human art and culture of all kinds of human-animal hybrids representing supernatural concepts. Men with wings, we call them angels. Bulls with human, horses with human bodies, we call them centaurs. Fish people with human bodies, fishy tails, we call them the Selkie or the mermaid. Why single out the reptilian? Our ancestors weren't literally talking about a reptilian being. What they were talking about was an idea. They were encapsulating a psychological idea in a piece of art. The problem is that people don't learn anything. They don't understand art. This is one of the things I want to do on this show going forward, is I want to teach you how to read art, how to read symbols, and how to read archetypes. The most ridiculous one of all is the Saturnalian. It's so ridiculous, the Saturn worship and the Saturnalian thing in the truth movement, that I'm almost convinced it's another psyop that was fed in to cause quick chaos. Apparently it's got something to do with a cube on the top of Saturn that is actually a hexagon, right? So that's somehow it's a cube. And those black cubes they have all over the world in public sculptures are temples to the Saturnalians and all this stuff. It's just, it sounds good, and it's also kind of annoying to me because by far Saturn is the most beautiful planet in the solar system. And I've seen some ridiculous things, that even a bowler hat is a representation of Saturn. I mean, this is the kind of being in the Saturn cult and all this stuff. There's no evidence to back it up. It's just been made up, and it just sounds good, and it's one more esoteric nonsense going nowhere thing. If I could find any hard proof for it, I would. There's no way. There's no reptilians, and also these other things require you to go into the world of aliens. Oh well, they knew there was a hexagon on the top of Saturn because they flew out there in a spaceship. You know, we're back to that thing again. It's just straw man compensation all over again. There were these beings, these jinn and so on the other side, are not physical beings. They're not actual shapes. They don't have a shape. Now, they could enter into the bodies of humans or animals, and I believe that's actually what a lot of demonic possession is. I even think at some level that's what psychopaths are. But they're not reptilians. They're nothing like that. There's none of that stuff going on. They don't have a shape. They don't have a form. And that's what's ridiculous about the idea, that they actually have a shape and a form. They don't. They have no shape and no form. These are just encapsulated ideas brought forward in an artistic representation to help you, our ancestors, understand the concept, to pin it down. You see, remember, in the past, most people were illiterate. They couldn't read and write. So an image or a graphic was used for that purpose instead. That's why there was so much work put into illustrated manuscripts, because the actual pictures were so big, it helped. You know, if you had an illustrated manuscript talking about the witches, well, most people couldn't read that, but there'd be a big stupid picture of all the women lining up to kiss the bottom of Satan. And so that's why the illustrated manuscript contained these drawings, just to help convey the image. And because we're assuming that people in the past had the same level of literacy we have today, that they took those things literally, quote unquote, they didn't read the text. The person would say, there is a demon in this world and here's what they look like. Or there's a demon, there's a reptilian shape, and this reptilian shape symbolizes the bad behavior that you're up to. You know, and it's interesting because that could be connected to the reptilian cortex of the brain. And then he would point to the reptilian, would point to the horse, the minotaur. This would deal with things like sexuality. There was all kinds of symbology, is a better term to use, and archetypes shown through these art, but they weren't necessarily that. And this is, for me, is the beauty of this stuff, is that exploration. Because if someone says they're reptilians and they're from another planet, then it's case closed. And a wall has been drawn around your psyche saying to you, they're reptilians and that's it. And therefore, do not explain anything else. Do not go looking anywhere else. Stay within the little world I put you in. You see what I'm saying? You see, there's a light in the sky. They're aliens from another planet. No, it's a light in the sky. Let's take it from that point on. Stay within my little world, my MUFON world of every light in the sky is an alien spacecraft that's visiting me. Stay in my black magic circle. You see how we get duped even in this home? Because a lot of it has to do with protecting their franchise, their truth franchise. Now, it may sound like I'm picking on people. They're all doing it. I didn't do it with the psychopath thing. In fact, I was attacked by people, a cult that see themselves as a representation of the psychopath in the alternative movement, as the source you go to. My attitude was, I want everyone talking about this. I don't even care if I'm never remembered for bringing the psychopath stuff out once it's out there. And that's why I gladly help people who are, taking the baton from me and running with it and going that direction, because I want this information out there. I don't necessarily have to have my name attached to it. I'm reaching around here to grab a magazine, and we're in the land of synchronicity. And this month's 40 Times magazine in the Strange Day section, I won't read the article this week, but go out and buy it. And it's the title. You're going to laugh when you hear this. It's called "The Jinn on the Increase," and basically, I'm not saying this is me that caused this, but I'm just saying that whenever I seem to get into something, it starts popping up everywhere. And here we go. Everyone's now talking about the jinn, and the inside 14 Times magazine. There's loads all about the jinn, how it's it's back bigger than ever in the Middle East, how it's entering into the Western canon. And so there you go. You see, there's the collective conscious at work again. Now, I've got 9 minutes left, and I want to talk about something that popped up with a chap on my wall called Mark, that many of you know on my Facebook page. I talk to him a lot, and there was something that came out in relation to the Holly Greig case. I won't go into detail about it, but basically last night I was out and I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about how you can't get a cup of tea as good as the cup of tea that you have in your own home. There are other people who can make lovely cups of tea, but for some reason your tea that you make is the best. And by the same token, there are people who make tea and it's truly atrocious. I think it's a lot to do with the Dr. Emoto concept of the energetic particles of a person going into the food. They love you, the food will be delicious, and you'll know it. That's why I would never eat anything made by that lunatic, what's his name? That Scottish guy, the Scottish guy who screams in the kitchen. I can't remember his name now. Pass me. But those kinds of people, and those kinds of chefs who scream, and people who, whenever there's hysteria or madness in a kitchen, that's going to go into the food. But the thing happens with tea. If someone has a lot of love and kindness for you, and they make a cup of tea and it's lovely, you will taste that. That's also why our grandmothers and grandparents, and before that, used to read tea leaves at the bottom of the cup. There's something about because this tea is mostly water with a slight amount of flowers in it, whatever it is in there. Fragrance. That's basically what it is, a fragrant water. Tea is an almost powerful substance. It seems to be very responsive to the psychic state of the person who's making the tea. And this is why tea if someone comes into your life and they make a cup of tea and the tea is awful, it's always awful tasting. And think about it, how can you screw up a cup of tea, right? You have to come to terms that there's something energetically not right with that person, that the tea tastes that bad. Because the energy is transferred into the water, and this is how the conversation came up tonight in relation to Down syndrome. One of the reasons Down syndrome people, they don't let them make tea, is not because they'll burn themselves, because most Down syndrome people are not that, they're not that dysfunctional. It's because the tea tastes horrible, because whatever makes them Down syndrome, they're energetically, it's shattered. The same insane people, you don't let them near kettles, not because they'll scald themselves or scald you, it's because you literally taste the tea, it'll be bad. I'm not putting down people, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. But tea, like, remember earlier on I mentioned the psychotic barometer? When the people you know who are psychotic and unstable or have a history of mental illness or haven't been sectioned, are in a state of wild hysteria, you know that black magic or black sorcery is on the increase, because they're the barometers. In a social sense, you'd have what I call the Danzig effect, where people, the same thing. The same with the tea. Tea seems to be an excellent barometer for knowing if someone really loves you or really hates you, has no feelings for you. And that's why on a build, you see, I've worked on, unlike most people in this movement, I didn't have like a nice, wealthy, middle class background. I had to start out. I didn't have a charmed life in a top job. I had to start out working on building sites. And one thing I always noticed on the building site was the young lad always makes the tea for the rest of them. So the young kid, the young labourer, the young lad who's always makes the tea for the rest of the older men. And the reason for that is the young lads subconsciously is trusted with making the tea, not because he's a grunt or because he's a lower form of life, but the young lads subconsciously they're aware that his energy is purer than the older men. He's not filled with the same bitterness, alcoholism, dysfunctionality, hatred, angers, frustration as the older ones. So he's a young kid, he's making money, he's having a laugh, he's usually the kid on the building site telling the jokes. And it's an interesting thing when you're the young lad on a building site that you find very quickly that you're protected by the older construction workers. They protect you. They look after you. It's almost like you become a surrogate son on the building site. Now they do play harmless kind of practical jokes on you, but there's no malice in them. And you're always the one who makes the tea. And the reason why you make the tea is because subconsciously you're the purest one. If they were to make the tea, it would have the horrible taste of all their frustrations, angers the night before out drinking. I tell you, you can learn an awful lot by working with Irishmen on a building site. An awful lot. You can. When you go around like the olden days, like you went to England, you saw the paddies on the building site. I tell you, if you were to go with, or even New York, if you were to go work with those people, you would get an education that you wouldn't get anywhere else, because it's almost like being in Lord of the Rings or something like that. And I got a hell of an education in working on building sites as a kid growing up. But yeah, I would always be made to make the tea, and it was always the same thing. Your first day on the job, they'd look at you and they'll say, "Okay, go make the tea now," and you would go make the tea, and the older building workers would drink the tea. That's a grand cup of tea, and you knew you had the job, and then they were going to treat you nice from that point on. And that's why you had the tea lady in the old offices in the old days, a lovely lady who went around with a gigantic canister of tea on a wheelie kind of trolley. In the old days, would bring the tea around and give them to the men and the women working in the office desks, and that was the tea lady. And she would be trusted as well, because she would be putting her maternal, matriarchal energies into the gigantic canister and going, "Oh, hello, Mr. Goldstein, here's your cup of tea. Oh, hello, Mrs. Bradshaw, here's your cup of tea. Oh, that's lovely, and here's a chocolate biscuit." It's the same kind of thing. Her energy was infused into that canister of water. And that's why these people were removed and replaced with bloody Starbucks and machines that make tea and all this kind of thing. We've forgotten our rituals. We've forgotten the beauty of these things. We've forgotten how important these things are. Now, one quick thing before I go. Yesterday was Shrove Tuesday. It's called Pancake Tuesday or Fat Tuesday in the rest of the world, and it's associated as a Christian holiday, stuffing your face before Lent. Like all these other Christian holidays, most of them anyway, it's rooted in paganism. Yesterday was a pagan holiday where you ate pancakes, and you're still supposed to be eating them. You're still supposed to be. It's not just that day. What you do is you get pancakes and you make them. You cover them in butter and honey, and they represent the taking of the sun inside your soul to keep your body and your metabolism hot until you reach the Feast of Ostara, which was co-opted by the Christians and called Easter. The first pancake is an offering to your ancestors, and the first pancake represents the sun. The second pancake represents the opening of the doors to your ancestors, and the third one is an offering. You don't eat the last. Sorry, not the third one. They don't eat the last pancake on the day. What you do is you throw it in the fire, and you give it as an offering to your deity. And this is all over Europe, all over Western and Northern Europe, which would be Odin if you're in the Nordic lands, Lu, the god of the sun, if you were in the Gaelic or Celtic lands, and Wales if you were in the Slavic world. So remember that next year. So I hope you've enjoyed tonight, the new moon. Please continue this celebration of the wonder of the human psyche, if you can, over on People's Internet Radio. If you want to stay here and listen to George, you can, but the three women over there are taking over the baton from me, and I'll see us next week. www.thomassheridanarts.com, and feck 'em if they can't take a joke. Good night.